That night, nobody on the 47th floor of Vantex Technologies noticed the black man mopping the hallway. To them, he was invisible, just another night shift janitor pushing a cleaning cart past million-dollar servers. But when 14 of the company's top engineers couldn't solve a critical system failure for 11 straight days, that same janitor quietly walked into the server room and fixed it in 7 minutes. The next morning, CEO Victoria Ashford reviewed the security footage 3 times. Then she called an emergency meeting and asked one question that shook the entire company. "Who is that man?" The apartment smelled like pine sol and cheap coffee. Elias Carter stepped through the front door at 5:15 in the morning, easing it shut behind him with the care of a man who had practiced the motion 1,000 times. His back ached. His knees throbbed from 8 hours of pushing a mop across polished concrete. The chemical smell of industrial cleaning solution had soaked so deep into his hands that no amount of scrubbing could pull it out anymore. He expected silence. He expected the apartment dark, his daughter asleep, the kitchen empty. But like every morning for the past 3 years, he was wrong. Maya sat at the kitchen table with a book open in front of her reading lamp casting a small circle of gold light in the gray apartment. She was 8 years old and had her mother's eyes wide, dark, impossibly alert for someone who should have been sleeping. She looked up when she heard his footsteps. "You're late today, Daddy." Elias set his work bag on the counter and forced a smile. Traffic. There was no traffic at 5 in the morning in southeast Austin, and they both knew it. But Maya accepted the answer the way she always did, with a small nod and a turn back to her book. He poured himself a glass of water and watched her read. She was growing fast, getting smarter, asking harder questions. Last week she had come home from school with one that still sat heavy in his chest. "Daddy Keisha's dad works in a big office," she had said, swinging her backpack onto the couch. "He has his own desk and his own computer. Do you have a computer at your job?" Elias had looked at his daughter standing there in her second-hand school shoes and felt something crack inside his ribs. He pulled her close and said, "I've got something better than a computer at work. I've got you at home." Maya had laughed, but Elias had turned away before she could see his face. Now in the quiet kitchen, he made her breakfast. Toast with peanut butter, sliced banana, on the side a glass of milk. He set it on the table and kissed the top of her head. She barely noticed, lost in a chapter about planets. This was their rhythm. He worked the night shift at Vantex Technologies, one of the biggest tech companies in Austin, mopping floors and emptying trash cans from 9 at night until 5 in the morning. His mother-in-law, Martha, came over every evening at 8:30 to watch Maya while he was gone. Martha was 71, tough as railroad iron, and she loved Elias like a son. She was one of the only people in the world who knew why a man with his mind was spending his nights cleaning other people's offices. The pay was barely enough. Rent took most of it. Food and Maya's school supplies took the rest. There was nothing left over, no savings, no safety net. Just the quiet arithmetic of survival that Elias recalculated every single day. But Elias Carter did not choose Vantex Technologies because of the paycheck. Every night after he finished mopping and the hallways fell silent, he walked, slowly, methodically through the office floors, past the engineers' desks with their monitors still glowing, past whiteboards covered in system diagrams, past lines of code left open on screens. He never touched anything, never sat down. He just looked the way a man who once built houses might walk through a neighborhood he used to live in, studying the walls, recognizing the bones beneath the paint. Elias had a secret, one he carried every night through those fluorescent hallways and brought home every morning to this small apartment where his daughter read books about planets. He had been patient for 3 years, watching, planning, waiting for the right moment. And for the past 47 nights, he had been inside the building itself, mopping floors and walking hallways, because a man who had taken everything from him, his career, his name, his future, was still sitting in a corner office on the 47th floor, collecting praise for work he did not do. Elias was not looking for revenge. He was looking for proof. 5 years ago, Elias Carter was not the man who mopped floors. He was the man who built what stood beneath them. At 33, he had been a senior systems architect at Vantex Technologies, the lead designer of the company's core data processing infrastructure. The system that every product, every client contract, every revenue stream at Vantex now depended on had started as a blueprint in Elias's mind. He had written the original architecture. He had laid the foundation line by module across 12 months of work that he poured everything into. He had also been one of the only black engineers in the entire technical division. That fact shouldn't have mattered. But it did. It mattered in the way people's eyes skipped over him in meetings. It mattered in the way his ideas were questioned twice while others were accepted once. And it mattered most on the day a man named Derek Morrison decided that Elias's work would look better with someone else's name on it. Derek was Elias's teammate. Same level, same department, same project. But where Elias was quiet, precise, and deeply technical, Derek was loud, polished, and surgically political. Derek understood something Elias never bothered to learn. In a company of 5,000 people, perception was more powerful than performance. Derek knew how to talk to executives. He knew how to position himself in emails. He knew how to stand next to someone else's work and let people assume it was his. When Elias's core architecture was nearly complete weeks before it was scheduled to be presented to the board of directors, Derek made his move. He copied Elias's entire design documentation. He altered the internal version history to strip Elias's name from the original commits. And then he manufactured a data breach. It was small, just enough to trigger an internal security review. A handful of confidential files accessed from an unauthorized terminal. Derek doctored the access logs, replacing his own user ID with Elias's. He filed the report himself, walking into the department head's office with the perfect expression of reluctant concern. "I didn't want to believe it," Derek had told them, shaking his head. But the logs don't lie. The logs did lie. Derek had made sure of it. The investigation was fast and internal. No outside audit. No independent review. The leadership team at the time, before Victoria Ashford's era, took Derek's report at face value. Elias was called into a conference room on a Tuesday afternoon and told his employment was terminated effective immediately. The words on his file read, "Terminated for cause unauthorized data access." He was escorted out of the building by security carrying a cardboard box past colleagues who wouldn't meet his eyes. He was 33 years old. He had a wife. He had a 3-year-old daughter who had just started making up stories about the shapes of clouds. And in a single afternoon, he lost everything he had built. The termination followed him like a shadow. Every job application, every interview, every recruiter call ended the same way. Someone would check his record, see the words "data breach," and the conversation would go cold. In the Austin tech industry, word traveled fast. Elias Carter became a name people recognized for the wrong reasons. Doors closed before he could knock. And then 4 months after he lost his job, Denise got sick. His wife had always been the steady one, the one who held his hand on the walk home from Vantex that Tuesday, the one who told him they would figure it out, the one who still looked at him the same way she had the day they met. But the diagnosis came without warning. Aggressive, advanced. The doctors used words that Elias understood technically, but could not process emotionally. Without company health insurance, the medical bills became a second catastrophe on top of the first. Elias sold their car, then the furniture, then moved them into a smaller apartment. He took whatever work he could find, warehouse shifts, delivery routes, overnight stocking jobs. None of it was enough. Denise fought for 14 months. She fought with everything she had, and Elias was beside her for every hour of it. But near the end, in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion, she held his hand and said something he would carry for the rest of his life. "I don't need you to prove anything to the world, Elias, but Maya does. That little girl needs to know who her father really is." Denise passed on a Sunday morning in March. Maya was 4 years old. She would grow up with only scattered fragments of her mother photographs, a gold necklace, and the stories her father told her at bedtime. Elias buried his wife, picked up his daughter, and kept moving. Not forward, just moving. 3 years later, he discovered that Derek Morrison was still at Vantex. Not just still employed, promoted. Derek was now the senior lead engineer of the company's biggest project, a $200 million AI initiative called Nova. The press releases called him the architect of Vantex's core infrastructure. The company website featured his photo. He was being celebrated for the system that Elias had designed. That was when Elias applied for the night shift janitor position at Vantex Technologies. It was Elias's 47th night on the job, 1:20 in the morning. The 47th floor was empty, the way it always was. At this hour, monitors' dark chairs pushed in the faint hum of the ventilation system, the only sound in the building. Elias was mopping the hallway outside the main server room for Project Nova when he heard it. A sound most people would have ignored, the cooling fans inside the server room cycling at an irregular rhythm. Speeding up, slowing down, speeding up again. To anyone else, it was background noise. To Elias, it was a heartbeat in distress. He stopped mopping. He stood still and listened. He had spent 5 years away from this world, but the instincts were still there, buried under layers of cleaning solution and exhaustion. That irregular fan cycle meant the processors were thermal throttling, which meant the memory load was spiking in waves, which meant something deep in the system's infrastructure was failing. He already knew the system was in trouble. Everyone at Vantex knew. For 11 days, the engineering team had been working around the clock to fix a critical failure in the Nova system. The board of directors had issued an ultimatum, 72 hours to resolve it, or the entire project would be shut down. The engineers had tried everything. Nothing worked. Elias looked at the server room door. It was supposed to require keycard access and a PIN code. Night shift janitors had no clearance, but tonight the door was slightly ajar. Ryan, the overnight engineer on monitoring duty, had stepped out for a phone call from his wife and hadn't pulled it fully shut behind him. Elias looked down the hallway. Empty. He looked at the door. Open. He knew what walking through that door could cost him. If anyone found out, he would lose his job instantly. He might face criminal charges for unauthorized system access. Everything he had spent 3 years building toward, the patience, the proximity, the slow search for proof, would collapse. But he also knew what the sound of those fans meant. The system was dying, and he was the only person in the building who understood why. Elias set down his mop. He walked through the door. The monitoring screens were lit with cascading red alerts. He sat down, and within seconds, he saw what the engineers had missed. The failure wasn't in the application layer where the team had been searching. It was in the infrastructure layer, a memory allocation conflict between two parallel processing modules, the exact layer he had designed 5 years ago. He also noticed something else. Buried in the system logs, there were recent manual overrides, deliberate configuration changes that didn't belong. The coding style looked familiar. Too familiar. Elias didn't investigate further. Not yet. He corrected the memory allocation, stabilized the system, and walked out 7 minutes later. He left the door exactly as he had found it, picked up his mop, and continued down the hallway as if nothing had happened. But the security camera in the corner of the server room had recorded every second. At 7:30 the next morning, Victoria Ashford arrived at Vantex headquarters earlier than usual. An automated system alert had landed in her inbox overnight. The Nova system had stabilized at 1:27 a.m. She checked the engineering access logs. No member of the technical team had logged in to make repairs. Victoria called the head of building security and requested the surveillance footage from the 47th floor. She watched the recording once. A man in a janitor's uniform walked into the server room, sat down at the main terminal, and began typing with the kind of speed and confidence that didn't belong to someone who cleaned floors for a living. His hands moved across the keyboard without hesitation, no searching, no guessing. She watched it a second time. She leaned closer to the screen, studying the way his fingers navigated the interface. This was not curiosity. This was expertise. She watched it a third time. At 8 o'clock, Victoria called an emergency meeting with every department lead on the Nova project. She connected her laptop to the conference room display and played the footage without a word of introduction. When it ended, she looked around the table. "Does anyone know who this man is?" Silence filled the room. Derek Morrison sat at the far end of the table. For just a fraction of a second, something shifted behind his eyes, a flash of recognition, sharp and involuntary, before he smoothed it away. He was the first to speak, his voice measured and calm. "That's a night shift janitor. He probably got curious and started pressing buttons. We should have security pull him in and check whether he caused any additional damage to the system." Victoria studied Derek's face for a long moment. Then she said, "Your team couldn't fix this system in 11 days, and you're telling me this man was pressing buttons?" She closed her laptop. "Find him. I want to speak with him personally. Today." Derek's jaw tightened. He said nothing, because Derek Morrison knew exactly who the man in the footage was, and he had spent 5 years making sure that name never surfaced again. Elias was at home that afternoon, setting out a plate of apple slices for Maya before her homework, when his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, a Vantex corporate extension. A woman from Human Resources told him he was needed at the office by 4 o'clock. She did not explain why. She said only that it concerned his shift the previous night. Elias hung up and stared at the phone in his hand. He had expected this. He just hadn't expected it so soon. He called Martha, who arrived within 20 minutes, her coat still on, when she walked through the door. Maya looked up from her math worksheet, confused. "Where are you going, Daddy? You don't work till nighttime." Elias knelt down so he was level with her eyes. "I've got something I need to take care of. I'll be home before bed. Promise." Maya studied his face the way she sometimes did, too perceptive for 8 years old. Then she said, "Daddy, if anyone says something mean about you, don't believe them. You're the smartest person I know." Elias kissed her forehead and left before his expression could betray him. He drove to Vantex in his 12-year-old Civic, the one with the cracked windshield and the air conditioning that only worked on the driver's side. It was the first time he had entered the building during daylight hours. At night, he was part of the scenery, invisible, expected, ignored. During the day, everything was different. The security guard in the lobby stopped him before he reached the elevator bank. Elias held out his employee badge, the same badge that got him through the door every night, without a second glance. The guard examined it, frowning. "This is a night shift access card, sir. You don't have daytime clearance." "Who called you in?" Elias told him. The guard picked up his desk phone and made a call to verify, while Elias stood in the middle of the lobby, hands at his sides, surrounded by employees in branded hoodies walking past him without a glance. 10 minutes. He stood there for 10 full minutes before the guard waved him through. In the elevator, a young engineer in a Vantex polo shirt looked him over from head to toe, the worn dress shirt, the unpolished shoes, the badge clipped to his belt that read, "Facilities Night Shift." The engineer pressed the button for floor 12, then looked at Elias. "Maintenance level is B2, the engineer said helpfully. Elias said nothing. He reached past the man and pressed 47. The conference room on the 47th floor was smaller than the one Victoria had used that morning. The light was harsh and white. Elias sat on one side of the table. On the other side sat Victoria Ashford, the head of building security, a man named Hoffman, and the director of human resources. Derek Morrison stood near the window with his arms folded, watching. Derek opened the conversation. His tone was polite, the kind of politeness that came with a blade underneath. "Mr. Carter, we need to understand why you were in the server room last night. That area is restricted. Janitorial staff have no access." Elias met his gaze. 5 years. 5 years since the last time they had been in the same room together, the day Derek had watched him get escorted out with a cardboard box. Elias kept his voice level. The door wasn't locked. I heard something wrong with the cooling system. I recognized it as a system failure. I went in and corrected it. Derek's mouth curved into a half smile, the kind meant to make the other person feel small. You recognized it as a system failure. You're a janitor, Mr. Carter. How exactly would you know what a system failure sounds like? Hoffman, the security director, leaned forward. We're also considering the possibility that you accessed the system without authorization and may have introduced further vulnerabilities. This is a serious matter. Elias looked at Derek directly, steadily, without blinking. He could feel the weight of 5 years pressing against his chest. Then he spoke slowly and clearly. I didn't tamper with the system. I repaired it. And I can explain exactly what the failure was and where it originated if you'll allow me to. Victoria, who had been watching the exchange without speaking, nodded once. Show us. Derek's half-smile disappeared. Victoria walked Elias to the main technical briefing room on the same floor. Inside, all 14 engineers from the Nova project team were already seated. They had been told only that someone would be presenting an analysis of the system failure. They had not been told who. When Elias walked in, a black man in a worn dress shirt, no laptop bag, no company lanyard, the reaction was immediate. Heads turned, glances were exchanged. Someone in the second row leaned toward a colleague and whispered loud enough for half the room to hear, "Is this a joke?" Derek positioned himself in the back corner, arms still folded, his face a mask of studied calm, but his eyes did not leave Elias. Victoria gestured toward the display screen at the front of the room. Mr. Carter, the floor is yours. Elias walked to the screen. He did not introduce himself. He did not explain his background. He went straight to the problem. He pulled up the system architecture diagram, the same architecture he had designed 5 years ago, though no one in the room knew that, and began to walk through the failure point by point. The language he used was precise, technical, and unhurried. He explained that the engineering team had been searching for the error in the application layer, the top level of the system. They had spent 11 days running diagnostics on the wrong floor of the building, so to speak. The real failure, Elias explained, was 2 levels deeper in the infrastructure layer, a memory allocation conflict between 2 parallel processing modules. Module A was overriding a memory block that Module B was actively using, creating a cascading instability that rippled through the entire system in cycles. The reason it was so hard to catch was that the symptoms appeared in the application layer, but the cause lived in the foundation. The room was quiet, not the skeptical quiet from a minute ago. A different kind, the quiet of people hearing something that made sense for the first time in 11 days. Marcus Webb, a senior engineer seated near the front, was the first to move. He opened his laptop, pulled up the system logs, and began cross-referencing what Elias had described. After less than 2 minutes, he stood up. He's right, Marcus said, looking around the room. He's completely right. The conflict is exactly where he said it is. We've been looking at the wrong layer this entire time. A murmur passed through the team. Engineers who had worked 80-hour weeks were now staring at a janitor who had diagnosed the problem in under 10 minutes. Derek stepped forward from the back of the room. His voice was controlled, but there was an edge to it now, sharper than before, the polish beginning to crack. This is interesting, but it raises a more important question. How does a member of the cleaning staff understand our system architecture at this level, unless he's been accessing the system for longer than just last night? I think we need to consider that this man may be a security threat, not a solution. It was a calculated pivot. Derek wasn't arguing the technical analysis, he couldn't, because Elias was right and Marcus had just confirmed it. So instead, he was attacking the messenger, turning competence into suspicion, making knowledge look like guilt. Victoria had been standing near the door, watching everything, the engineer's reactions, Marcus's confirmation, Derek's pivot. She walked to the front of the room and addressed Elias directly. Mr. Carter, before you worked as a janitor here, what did you do? Elias looked at her. Then briefly, his gaze shifted to Derek. The two men locked eyes for a single second, 5 years of silence compressed into that one look. Elias turned back to Victoria. I was a systems architect. I used to design software infrastructure. That's all I want to say right now. Victoria held his gaze, then nodded. She turned to Hoffman. I want the full employment history of Mr. Carter pulled from our records. Everything. On my desk by 9 tomorrow morning. Derek's expression didn't change, but beneath the table his right hand gripped the arm of his chair until his knuckles turned white. By 9 the following morning, the picture had begun to come into focus. Human Resources pulled Elias Carter's original employment file from the company's archive system. The record confirmed what Elias had not said out loud. He had been a senior systems architect at Vantex Technologies, hired 6 years ago, terminated 5 years ago. The reason listed in his file was a single line, terminated for cause unauthorized data access. The termination report had been filed by the department head at the time based on an internal investigation. The employee who had reported the alleged breach and provided the supporting evidence was Derek Morrison. Victoria read the file twice, then set it on her desk and removed her reading glasses. She had joined Vantex as CEO 3 years ago, long after Elias's departure. She had inherited the company, its systems, and its personnel, including Derek, who by then had already been promoted to senior lead engineer and was being credited publicly as the architect behind the Nova infrastructure. But something about the file didn't sit right. The investigation had been handled entirely in-house. No external forensic audit, no third-party review of the access logs, just one man's testimony and a set of logs that were never independently verified. Victoria called Marcus Webb into her office. She closed the door and asked him a direct question. What do you know about Elias Carter's time here before he was terminated? Marcus shifted in his seat. I started 3 years ago, so I wasn't here when it happened. But there have always been rumors in the engineering department. Some of the older developers have said off the record that the original core architecture of the Nova system wasn't Derek's work. They said it was built by an engineer who got fired. The code signature in the original foundation layer is completely different from anything Derek has ever written. I noticed it myself, but I never had a name to attach to it. Now he did. Victoria made 2 decisions that morning. The first was the test she would give Elias Carter 4 hours to fix the Nova system's failure completely in front of the engineering team. If he succeeded, she would consider a formal position for him. If he failed, the unauthorized access charge would stand, and she could not protect him from the legal consequences. The second decision was one she kept entirely to herself. She instructed the IT security division to run a full forensic audit of every change made to the Nova system's version history and access logs over the past 5 years. Every modification, every override, every reassignment of authorship, including data from the automated backup that ran independently of any admin account. She told no one about the second decision, not Hoffman, not HR, and certainly not Derek Morrison. The terms were simple. Elias had 4 hours. He would work on the live Nova system in the main server operations room with the full engineering team observing. If he resolved the failure, Victoria would personally review his case and consider reinstating him in a technical role. If he failed, the company would proceed with the unauthorized access investigation, which could result in criminal referral. Elias accepted without negotiation. He understood the stakes better than anyone in the room. This was not a job interview. This was a trial. But what Elias did not know, what no one except Derek knew, was that the system he was about to repair had been quietly sabotaged a second time. 2 hours before Elias sat down at the terminal, Derek had logged into the Nova system using his senior admin credentials. He navigated to the network routing configuration, a layer separate from the memory allocation issue Elias had fixed 2 nights ago, and introduced a subtle conflict. A routing loop that would cause intermittent system instability invisible at first, but guaranteed to surface under the kind of deep repair Elias was about to attempt. It was a trap. If Elias couldn't explain the new instability, it would look like his original fix had been flawed, or worse, that he had introduced the problem himself. Derek had done this before. Not exactly this, but the same principle. Over the past 2 years, he had quietly inserted small errors into the Nova system on 14 separate occasions, minor enough to avoid catastrophic failure, but persistent enough that only he could fix them. It was his insurance policy. As long as the system periodically broke in ways only he seemed to understand, he remained indispensable. The current crisis, the 11-day failure that brought the company to its knees, was the accumulated result of those interventions finally compounding beyond his control. Derek had not meant to crash the system. He had only meant to stay necessary. Now, with Elias threatening to expose the architecture's true origins, Derek needed him to fail publicly and permanently. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Elias sat down at the primary terminal in the server operations room. The engineering team stood or sat behind him in a semicircle. Marcus Webb had positioned himself at a secondary workstation to monitor the system in real time. Victoria watched from the glass-walled observation area above the server floor. The first 2 hours went smoothly. Elias worked through the memory allocation conflict he had temporarily patched 2 nights ago, this time rebuilding it from the ground up. He rewrote the module distribution framework according to the original architecture he had designed 5 years earlier, but improved, optimized accounting for the system's growth since his departure. His fingers moved across the keyboard with the kind of fluency that only comes from having built something with your own hands. The engineers watching began to nod, one by one. Marcus tracked the system metrics on his screen and confirmed every change Elias made was clean. Then, in the 3rd hour, something went wrong. The system destabilized again. Not the original memory conflict, something new. Network routing errors cascaded across 3 modules, triggering alerts that hadn't appeared in any of the previous diagnostics. The repair Elias was performing should have resolved the instability, not created more of it. But the monitors were flashing amber, then red. A few engineers exchanged uneasy glances. Someone muttered, "He might have made it worse." Derek, standing near the observation glass, allowed himself the smallest shift in expression, not a smile exactly, but the satisfied look of a man watching a plan unfold on schedule. Elias stared at the screen. For the first time since he had walked into the server room 2 nights ago, his hands went still on the keyboard. He didn't understand. The fix was correct. The original architecture was sound. There was no reason for this. He thought about Maya, about the look on her face that morning when she told him he was the smartest person she knew. He thought about the apartment and the cleaning solution and the old Civic with the cracked windshield. He thought about what failure here would mean, not just for his career, but for the only thing that mattered. If he couldn't prove himself now, Derek would use this moment to bury him for good. The unauthorized access charge would stick. His name would carry 2 black marks instead of 1, and Maya would grow up never knowing the truth about her father. 38 minutes left on the clock. Elias did not try to fix the new error. Instead, he did something none of the engineers expected. He opened the system change log, a detailed record of every modification made to the Nova system's configuration, and filtered it to show all changes made within the past 24 hours. The room went quiet. The engineers had been watching his hands on the keyboard, expecting rapid-fire code. Instead, he was reading. And then he found it. A single configuration change in the network routing layer made 2 hours before his test began. The timestamp was clear. The modification had been executed through a senior administrator account, one of only 3 people in the company with that level of access. Victoria Ashford was one. The chief technology officer currently traveling overseas was another. The third was Derek Morrison. Elias stared at the entry. The rooting conflict hadn't been there 2 nights ago when he had stabilized the system. It was new, it was deliberate. And it had been inserted at precisely the right moment to make him look incompetent. Something heavier than anger settled in his chest. It was recognition. 5 years ago, Derek had planted false evidence to destroy him. And now, in this very room, Derek was doing it again. The method was different, a sabotaged config instead of doctored access logs, but the intent was identical. Discredit Elias, protect himself, maintain the lie. For a moment, Elias felt the full weight of those 5 years, the mop handle in his hands, the hospital bills on the kitchen table, the sound of Denise's voice getting weaker, the look on Maya's face when she asked about computers. All of it pressed down on his shoulders in that server room, under the cold blue light with the engineering team and a CEO watching his every keystroke. He had a choice. He could stand up right now, point at the log entry, and accuse Derek in front of everyone. It would be dramatic. It would be satisfying. But it would also be exactly what Derek was prepared for, a confrontation that could be spun as a disgruntled ex-employee making wild accusations. Derek would deny it. He would question the integrity of the logs. He would make Elias look bitter and unstable. It would become a he said. And in that contest, the senior lead engineer would always win over the night janitor. So Elias chose a different path. He would fix everything, the original failure and Derek's sabotage, and he would do it in a way that left no room for denial. He would rebuild the system using a full integrity restoration protocol, a process that would scan and record every modification made to the Nova architecture over the past 5 years. Every override, every reassignment of authorship, every falsified log. The restoration wouldn't just fix the system. It would generate a complete, unalterable audit trail stored in protected memory that no administrator, not even Derek, could delete or modify. Elias would not accuse anyone. He would let the system speak for itself. He turned back to the keyboard. 26 minutes remained. His hands, the same hands that had pushed a mop across this floor for 47 nights, the same hands that had held his wife's fingers in a hospital bed, the same hands that had sliced apples for his daughter that very morning, began to type. Faster now. More precise. Every keystroke deliberate, every command exact. He was not just repairing a system. He was building a mirror, one that would reflect 5 years of lies back at the man who had told them. 2 weeks before any of this happened, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Elias had been sitting at the kitchen table watching Maya draw. She was working on a family portrait for a school assignment. The picture showed 4 figures standing in front of a house, Maya in the middle, tall and grinning with a purple backpack. Elias next to her holding her hand. Martha on the other side, shorter and round with a big smile, and above them all, a single gold star in the sky. "That's Mama," Maya said, pointing at the star with her crayon. "She watches us from up there." Elias looked at the drawing and felt something tighten behind his eyes. Maya kept coloring. Then she said, without looking up, "My teacher asked me what you do for work. I told her you work at a big building at nighttime." She switched crayons blue to green. "She asked what you do there. I told her you protect the building at night so everyone can sleep safe." Elias watched his daughter fill in the grass beneath the 4 figures. He did not correct her. "That's right, baby," he said. "That's exactly what I do." Maya nodded, satisfied, and kept drawing. She didn't know about the server room. She didn't know about Derek Morrison or the access logs or the system her father had built before she was old enough to remember. She only knew that her father left every night and came back every morning, and that he always kept his promises. And right now in the server room on the 47th floor, Elias was keeping the biggest one. Elias had already been typing for several minutes when he glanced at the clock. 19 minutes left. He rebuilt the memory allocation framework from its foundation, the same architecture he had designed 5 years ago, but refined, now sharpened by half a decade of thinking about it in silence, while he mopped floors and rode the elevator alone at 2 in the morning. His fingers moved with the certainty of a man returning to a language he had never truly forgotten. The engineers behind him had stopped whispering. Marcus Webb tracked every change on his secondary monitor, his expression shifting from cautious to focused to something close to awe. What Elias was writing wasn't just a patch. It was a reconstruction, elegant, efficient, and structurally sound in a way the Nova system hadn't been in years. 12 minutes left. Elias turned to the network routing conflict, the one Derek had planted 2 hours before the test. He dismantled it methodically, not with the urgency of a man racing a deadline, but with the calm precision of a surgeon who could see exactly where the damage was and exactly how to remove it. He corrected the routing tables, cleared the cascading errors, and restored the data pathways to their intended configuration. Then he executed the final command, a full system integrity restoration. The protocol would do 2 things simultaneously. First, it would bring the entire Nova system back online with a clean, optimized architecture. Second, it would generate a comprehensive audit trail by scanning every modification, every override, and every authorship change recorded in the system's independent backup over the past 5 years. That data would be written to a protected memory partition, read-only tamper-proof, accessible to executive-level review, but impossible for any single administrator to alter or erase. Elias did not announce what the restoration protocol would produce. He simply ran it. 4 minutes left. He pressed enter. The room held its breath. The monitoring screens flickered as the Nova system cycled through its restart sequence. Red indicators shifted to amber. Amber shifted to green. One module came online, then another, like lights turning on in a building floor by floor from the basement to the roof. Marcus was the first to speak. He stared at his screen, ran a performance diagnostic, and looked up. The system is fully operational, and it's running 23% faster than before the failure. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Marcus stood and began to clap. A second engineer joined him, then a third. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding, not politely, not out of obligation, but with the raw, unguarded recognition of people who understood exactly what they had just witnessed. Victoria Ashford stood behind the observation glass arms at her sides, watching. She did not applaud, but she nodded, once slowly, deliberately, the nod of a woman who had seen enough to know what came next. Derek Morrison had not moved from his position near the glass wall. His face was still, his arms were still folded, but the color had drained from his skin, and his eyes were locked on the terminal screen where the system integrity restoration was still running in the background, quietly compiling 5 years of data into a record that could not be undone. He knew what that protocol would find. He had always known. The next morning at 9 o'clock, Victoria convened a meeting in the executive conference room. The attendees were limited Hoffman from security, the head of human resources, Marcus Webb, and Elias Carter. Derek Morrison received the same calendar invitation. When Derek walked in and saw Elias sitting at the table, not in the chair of the accused this time, but next to Marcus with a coffee in front of him, something behind his composure cracked for just a moment before he smoothed it back into place. He took the seat farthest from Elias and said nothing. Victoria did not begin with pleasantries. She connected her laptop to the conference room display and opened a file, the audit trail generated by the system integrity restoration Elias had executed the previous afternoon. The data had been cross-referenced overnight with the independent forensic audit she had quietly ordered days earlier. The results matched exactly. She turned the screen toward the room and began with the first finding. The version history of the Nova system's core architecture showed that 87% of the original foundational code had been committed under the user account E. Carter. Every original design document, every infrastructure blueprint, every critical module that the system still depended on had Elias's digital fingerprint. 6 months after his termination, those authorship records had been systematically reassigned to the account D. Morrison. The reassignment had been performed using senior administrator credentials, Derek's credentials. Victoria moved to the second finding. The access logs from the data breach that had led to Elias's termination 5 years ago still existed in the system's automated backup, the independent record that ran separately from any admin-controlled system. The original unmodified logs showed that the unauthorized data access had originated from Derek Morrison's workstation, not Elias Carter's. The logs that were presented during the internal investigation had been altered after the fact. The modifications were made from Derek's admin account 6 hours before he filed his report with the department head. Derek had not discovered a breach. He had manufactured one. Victoria moved to the third finding. Over the past 2 years, Derek's admin account had made 14 unauthorized manual modifications to the Nova system's configuration, small targeted interventions that introduced controlled instabilities into the architecture. Each time, Derek had subsequently resolved the issue, reinforcing his reputation as the only person who truly understood the system. The cumulative effect of those interventions was the catastrophic failure that had crippled the Nova project for 11 days and brought the company to the edge of losing a $200 million contract. The most recent unauthorized modification, the network routing conflict that nearly derailed Elias's repair test, had been made just 2 hours before the test began. Victoria closed the file. She removed her glasses and set them on the table. Then she looked directly at Derek. "Mr. Morrison, would you like to respond to any of this?" Derek's mouth opened. He glanced around the room at Hoffman, at HR, at Marcus, and finally at Elias. He started to speak, his voice reaching for the same confident, measured tone that had carried him through 5 years of deception. This data could have been manipulated. Someone with access to the restoration protocol could have... Marcus cut him off. The audit trail was generated from the automated backup. It operates on a separate read-only partition. No administrator account, including yours, has write access to that data. It's the original record, unmodified. Derek said nothing more. His hands lay flat on the table, motionless. The room was silent except for the low hum of the ventilation system, the same sound that filled every floor of the building day and night, noticed by almost no one. Elias sat still throughout the entire presentation. He did not point at Derek. He did not raise his voice. He did not say a single word. He had spent 5 years letting other people's lies define him. Now he let the truth speak for itself. Victoria stood. "Mr. Morrison, you are suspended, immediately effective now. Legal will be in contact. This meeting is over." Derek rose from his chair and walked out of the conference room. No one watched him leave. He passed through the door the same way Elias had passed through it 5 years ago, alone in silence with everything he had built collapsing behind him. But there was one difference. When Elias had walked out that door 5 years ago, he had been innocent. Derek was not. After the room cleared, Victoria asked Elias to stay. They sat across from each other in the empty conference room, the morning light coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows and falling across the table between them. Victoria spoke first. "I've read your complete file, the original, and what was done to it. What happened to you 5 years ago should never have been allowed. This company failed you. I can't undo that, but I can make sure the record is corrected." She laid out what Vantex was prepared to offer: full expungement of the termination from his employment record, restoration of his title as Senior Systems Architect with compensation reflecting both his experience and the years he had lost, an invitation to lead the Nova project as its principal architect, and an internal company communication clarifying that the original core infrastructure of the Nova system had been designed by Elias Carter, not Derek Morrison. Elias listened without interrupting. When she finished, he did not react the way she might have expected. There was no relief on his face, no triumph, no celebration. He looked out the window at the Austin skyline, the same city where he had driven a delivery truck stocked warehouse shelves and scrubbed floors to keep his daughter fed. "I designed that system when I was 33, he said quietly. My wife was alive. My daughter was just starting to make up stories about cloud shapes. I thought it was the beginning of everything. Turned out it was the last good thing before I lost it all." Victoria waited. Elias turned back to her. "I didn't come back for the money. I didn't come back for the title. I came back because my daughter deserves to know the truth about who her father is. That's the only thing I need." Victoria nodded. "Then let her know." That afternoon, Elias called Martha from the parking lot of Vantex Technologies. He sat in his Civic with the cracked windshield and told her everything. The audit, the evidence, Derek's suspension, the job offer, the cleared record. Martha was quiet for a long time. Then her voice came through the phone, thick and unsteady. "Denise always knew. She told me before she passed, she said, 'Mama, he's going to find his way back, just give him time.' And she was right, baby. She was right." Elias leaned his head against the steering wheel and closed his eyes. He stayed like that for a while in the parking lot of the building that had taken everything from him and was now giving some of it back. Not all of it. Nothing could return the years. Nothing could bring Denise home. But the lie that had hung around his neck for 5 years, the lie that had defined him, diminished him, and followed him into every job interview and every sleepless night that lie was finally, permanently over. 2 weeks later, Elias Carter walked into Vantex Technologies at 8:30 in the morning. He wore a new dress shirt, nothing expensive, but clean and pressed, bought with the first advance from his reinstated salary. His badge was new, too. It hung from a company lanyard around his neck, printed with his name and his title, Elias Carter, Senior Systems Architect. The security guard in the lobby, the same man who had stopped him and made him wait 10 minutes just weeks earlier, looked up as Elias approached. This time there was no delay, no phone call to verify. The guard nodded and said, "Good morning, Mr. Carter." Elias nodded back. No resentment, no satisfaction, just acknowledgement. He took the elevator to the 47th floor. The hallway looked different in the morning light, brighter, wider, full of people. He passed the stretch of polished concrete he had mopped hundreds of times. Near the corner where the cleaning supply closet stood, a new night shift janitor was restocking a cart for the evening ahead. Elias stopped, looked the man in the eye, and said good morning. The janitor looked surprised that anyone had noticed him at all. Elias walked to his new workstation in the engineering wing. The desk was simple, a monitor, a keyboard, a chair. He sat down and placed 2 things beside the screen. The first was a framed photograph of Denise and Maya taken the summer before Denise got sick. Maya was on Denise's lap, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. The second was a small folded piece of paper Maya's family drawing from her school assignment, with the 4 figures standing in front of a house and a single gold star watching from the sky. That afternoon, Elias picked Maya up from school. She climbed into the back seat of the Civic, tossed her backpack on the floor, and noticed the new badge hanging from her father's neck. She reached forward and held it in her small hands, reading the words out loud. "Elias Carter, Senior Systems Architect." She looked up at him in the rearview mirror, her mother's eyes bright and wide. "Daddy, does this mean you have a computer at work now?" Elias looked at his daughter's face in the mirror and smiled the kind of smile that didn't fade when she looked away. "Yeah, baby, I do." Elias Carter never told anyone the full story. He never went to the press. He never demanded a public apology. He never spoke about Derek Morrison again, because the best kind of justice doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It simply stands in the light and lets the truth do what the truth has always done, outlast every lie ever told about it. Some systems can be hacked, rewritten, and manipulated, but the truth is something else entirely. It sits in a place no one can reach, waiting patiently for the day someone brave enough comes along to pull it into the open. Elias Carter was that someone. And he did it the same way. He did everything quietly, precisely, and for the only person who ever needed to know: his daughter. And if this story stayed with you, if you felt something for Elias, for Maya, for the quiet dignity of a man who refused to let a lie define him, then maybe you understand what this channel is about. We tell the stories that don't get told. The ones about people who get knocked down, stay down for a while, and then stand back up without making a sound. If that's the kind of story you want to hear more of, you know what to do. Subscribe, hit that notification bell, and come back, because the next story might be about someone just like you.